Today's chapter is about actually painting. I think acrylic paint is wonderful for beginners. It's forgiving, it's fun, you can play with it and you can let it dry, come back to it, you can, cover over it, you can scrape it off, and you can turn it upside down, and you can, whatever you want to do, it's just great. Let's get painting and make a mess. So I have my workstation all set up. I've got my paint ready, my brushes, everything is ready to go. And in this chapter, we'll be focusing on color blocking your canvas, adding that thicker layer of paint, and then coming in with those little details at the end and getting it to look just how you want it to look. Let me show you what we're after. So this is a piece that I did a while back, similar to what we're doing, but a little bit different in terms of color. Clearly, I have a thing for pears. I've been painting them for the last few weeks, so just join me in this love of pears. This is a great visual aid just to show you kind of what we're going for, what the goal is. So basically what I'll be teaching you today is how to block in a painting, which is essentially just popping color on a canvas. Real quick, no fear. The second step is we're going to go in and just kind of add thicker paint here and there where we want to. To finalize everything for the third step, we're just going to add some fun little details to bring everything to life. So join me on this journey, and we're going to do this together. So we have all of our paint laid out. Everything is ready to go. So now it's time to just kind of get cozy, make sure everything is how you want it to be and you can see everything before you, and really just take a minute to observe your still life. So I'm noticing that my pear is by far the darkest thing about my still life. I'm also recognizing that I've got some really fun shadows happening on the tea towel, as well as that really kind of crisp cream color of the tea towel. As I'm making all these assessments and thinking this through, I'm actually making decisions about how I want my piece to look. So take a minute and just absorb what you're seeing. This is part of the process. So blocking in is the first step to working on a still life painting. We are not looking for any specific details at this point. At this point, all we're looking for is to get paint on that canvas and just start playing. So let's start blocking in the background of our painting, and then we'll work on this foreground area, and then we'll focus on the pear. The background color of my still life is just this really beautiful kind of muted dusky pink. I want to remind you, we are not looking for a perfect match of color. We're just trying to get close. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a big old kind of glob of white paint for this one because I know that my background color is light. And then I want to start kind of mixing in little bits of color to try to push this white in the direction of the background color. So to start, I'm just going to add a little bit of this beautiful cadmium red. I don't want to add too much, as though you're cooking and you just want to salt a dish, but you don't want to add a ton of salt right away. You just want to add a little tiny bit. Once you've mixed a color and you feel like you're starting to get close, I like to scoop that color up on my palette knife and hold it up. I'm just trying to look at the color that I have and think through what kind of extra little bits of color do I need to add to push this color in the direction that I want it to go. So I know I want to add a little bit of ochre to this one to give it that warmth that I was seeing. And I also know that I want to add a little bit of the raw umber because raw umber is a great way to just kind of turn down the volume on a color. So I'm mixing those colors together. I think I'm going to start out here. I want to grab just a little bit of the color that I've made and create the shadow color because I am seeing a little bit of a shadow against that background. So I'm just going to steal about a quarter of this color that I've already made and darken it a little bit. I think I'm seeing a little bit of brown in that shadow color, so I'm just going to add a little bit of that raw umber. And then for this one, I think I want to add a little bit of that ultramarine blue because ultramarine and raw umber together makes a really lovely shadow. And then once I feel confident that I've got some colors that are close enough, it's time to actually start putting the paint on the canvas. So I am going to grab my flat brush, one of the wider flat brushes that you have, because when we're blocking in, we're not going to be worrying about tiny little details or anything like that. We're just trying to find a brush that will help us apply enough paint to the canvas straight away. So I'm grabbing my flat brush and getting it loaded with water, And then I just want to take that brush full of all the water and start to mix water into that paint. So just mix it in until you get like kind of like a nice little creamy pool of paint. Grabbing that thick paint and pulling it in and creating a pool of paint that's a little bit thin. We want to start out blocking in with thinner paint, and then we'll go in with thicker paint later. I like to start blocking in a little bit closer to the pear shape. I, for some reason, really love to start by defining the edge of the object that I'm seeing. So I'm just going to take that paint and kind of run that paint along the edge of the pear. And then from there, I just want to start covering my canvas with paint. Don't worry too much about if you cover up the pencil lines. When you're working on this initial blocking in, you will cover up the pencil lines, and that's okay. Oftentimes they'll kind of peek through and remind you where you wanted things to go. So just go ahead and just kind of cover the background area with paint. You know, I'm just kind of loosely painting around what I've got. If you're working with this sort of blocking in or creamy consistency, you should be able to see most of your sketch kind of peeking through the brushwork. So this background kind of blocked in area is still wet. And while it's wet, I just want to grab a little bit of this shadow color that I've already made and pop it right into where I'm seeing it in the background. Now I'm going with a similar consistency here. It might be a little bit thicker. And when you're working with wet paint right into wet paint, you do get this natural blending that happens. And that's really fun. So now you have your background all blocked in, and it's time to move to looking at the foreground. I am seeing so much of this really, really pretty creamy color. So I'm gonna start mixing there, and then I'll grab a little bit of that color and mix up the dark version of it for the shadow. First, little housekeeping. I always like to take the color that I've made from the last step and keep it. So I'm just gonna move that color to the top of my palette and just make sure that if I have any left, I'm saving it. I'm gonna grab that kind of crisp white, the titanium white, and I want to start mixing up that really pretty tea towel color. So I know that it's pretty close to white already. I just want to add a little bit of ochre into the white and see what happens. I think that might be all I need. And I just, again, want to hold it up and see how close I'm getting. I actually really like that. It's going to be kind of a fresh, crisp color, and I can always sort of tweak that color as I go. Got a good amount of it. Now it's time to kind of steal a little bit of that color and mix up the shadow, because I'm definitely getting a defined shadow color underneath this pear here. So I want to add a little bit of my ultramarine blue and a little bit of the raw umber. And you'll notice with this palette, the ultramarine blue and the umber darken colors beautifully. So for the color blocking phase, we really want to kind of break it down into steps so that it's easy to understand. And I think it's always great to have a base color for the giant kind of areas of color that you're seeing, as well as the shadow color. So as I'm doing this, I'm making sure to mix up a healthy amount of that overall coverage color, and then kind of taking a little bit of that and creating the darkened shadow color. So I'm going to start by adding that really pretty bright kind of creamy color. I just want to add some water to it, and I'm going to do the same thing I did for the background. And then once you're ready to go, start layering that paint down. So I see that I have a lot of that color kind of right over on this side of my pear. And I just want to kind of cover the canvas. I'm not thinking about detail. You're always wanting to work simple to complex. So you're thinking of simple shapes, and then you're focusing later on those more complicated shapes and details. And I love how I'm already seeing this tint kind of shining through. That's a fun part of the process, is just deciding how much of that you really want to keep in your final piece and how much of it you want to cover up. And I'm not worried on going in too thick just yet. I know I'm going to do that in the next step. So this is just the rough draft for color, which is great. I just want to pick up a little bit of that shadow color with my creamy brush and let the two colors sort of blend naturally while I'm painting it onto the canvas. So I just kind of start painting that in and let those colors sort of mush together. And then once I have that started, grab a little bit more of the shadow color and just keep going with it. So you have your foreground done. Now it's time to move to the actual subject, the pear. So we're gonna mix up a base color for the pear, start there. So I want to start with my yellow ochre because that's the color that I'm seeing as the primary makeup for the pear color. So we'll get that mixed in with a little bit of the ivory, and I'm just gonna go ahead and try to mix the color I'm seeing first. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of this burnt umber. So if you need to warm something up and mute it at the same time, that's your go-to color. So I'm just gonna grab a little bit of the cadmium red and see what that does. Actually, in mixing this one, I think I've actually mixed a really beautiful dark. So because I've already mixed a dark and I'm really happy with it, I'm actually gonna work backward. I'm going to leave that there, scoop a little up, and lighten it a little. So I'm gonna add a little of this cadmium yellow and a little more of this cadmium red light. This is just a process. You start mixing a color, it's going in a direction, and then you add something and it goes this way. And you're basically like guiding the color to the direction you want it to go. So have fun with it. Don't worry about it. This is the fun part. So now I'm going to use the same process. I am just going to grab my brush, get a little bit of water, and get that kind of primary pear shade all over my brush. And then I just want to kind of take note of this little map that I've drawn because I've actually drawn those little bubbles that will help guide me when I'm painting these shadows. So I just want to start kind of adding this color everywhere I see those shadow shapes. So I'm just going to kind of cover quickly over where I'm seeing these shadows. And then once I have a pretty good little base layer, I just want to add in that highlight here. Okay, so now you can see what a painting looks like when it's just been blocked in. It's kind of washy, but you've got color everywhere, and you've basically given yourself a really cool rough draft. And now it's time to move on to the next step. We'll be adding some thicker layers and just kind of like bulking up this canvas a little bit. So in this round of painting, you're really just kind of assessing what you've already done and adding an extra layer for dimension. So I'm already seeing that my background has a little bit more pink to it than I want. So I want to make sure that when I'm mixing the thicker background shade, I'm actually mixing a color that's a little bit more of like kind of a bisque or just a little bit more muted. And for the foreground, I know I definitely want to go thicker with that really pop cream color. I really want that to punch and to feel really alive. With the pear, I know I'm going to want to add a little bit more of a dark shadow, and I definitely want to see just a little bit more of that golden kind of highlight as well. So I've already got my marching orders here. I know what I want to do, and now it's time to get started on that second round. So start off again with that heavy cream consistency, but I'm just kind of mixing a little bit less water in, so the paint is just a little thicker. It's going to cover a little bit faster. This is where you can start creating that play between washier kind of brushwork and the thicker brushwork on top of it. Okay, so you can see that I've already kind of thickened my paint and added a few more layers of just shadow and color. Now I feel pretty solid about this piece. I feel like it's time to start with step 3, which is adding those fun little details that really bring this thing to life. So now it's time to do one more round of assessing. Take a look at your still life, take a look at your painting and just start to think through what details are really important to you. The stem is just kind of quirky and it sort of makes this pear look interesting to me. It's like he's got this little hat. I also see that it has this really dark shadow right underneath where the pear meets the tea towel. And I really love that. I think that when you add those really dark shadows, it kind of brings this sense of dimension to the whole piece. I think those two details are really gonna make this thing feel alive. So I'm gonna start there and then I'm gonna start seeing what else I notice after that. So to get started, I just wanna look at the stem and try to create a color that's similar to that. And I know it's really dark, but I am seeing a little bit of red and a little kind of lightness to it as well. So again, the same process that I used for all the previous steps, I'm using even for the details. I'm taking a look, I'm noticing the color that I'm seeing, and then I'm mixing a color that sort of mimics that. So once I have that color mixed, I just want to take my tiny little round brush, get water in there, tap a little bit of the water off. For the detail brushes, it's always a good idea to just kind of tap a little bit of the water off, because what can happen is the water can kind of collect and then it can over mix into your paint. So just dry that off and just mix it up, get it to a nice consistency. I want mine to be pretty thick. So I've got this dark brown color and I just want to kind of follow. I can see my little pencil mark kind of shining through, which is great. It's doing its job. And I just want to kind of use little tapping brush strokes to create this shape that I'm seeing. So he's sort of like an arch shape. And he gets a little bigger at the top. There we go. And I like that. I think it just needs a little bit of a highlight and maybe one more little hit of dark as well. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of that highlight color and just pop it right where I'm seeing it. And I'm seeing it on the stem, kind of in the middle, just little glimmers of it. And you'll notice that taking a detail and just adding a little bit of a highlight, it can really make a big difference. Now I think I'd like to just go in and add a few little kind of punchy brush strokes to the pear to give it a little bit more dimension. So I'm going to grab my short brush. This is a flat brush, but it's got shorter bristles, so it's called a bright. I'm going to start off by using some of the light color that I made for this pear. I'm just going to add even a little more kind of vibrant yellow to it. It's close to what I'm seeing, but it just has a little bit more kind of brightness, and that's sort of how I want it to look. The area where I want my main highlight, I'm going pretty thick. And the beauty of these little kind of flat-topped brushes is that you can really just kind of place the paint on top of your canvas and you get this fun little actual like line shape with the brush stroke. And I like that. I like to save that for the end though. So while I have this brush out, I think I want to go in and add a little bit more dimension, a little more thicker paint right here. And I'm actually getting pretty close to being done here. Now that you're starting on the detail, keep working on it, keep seeing those fun little transition colors, thicken your paint on your pear and add some little punches of color and things like that, and just really have fun with it. So you're done with your details, you've got your piece wrapped up, we just have one final detail. Your signature. A few tips here. When I put a signature on a painting, I like to put it in one of the bottom corners. You can put it wherever you want, but I like to look for an area where there's no detail that I'm going to be competing with. I like to grab the smallest round tip brush that I have because you're just going to get a little bit of a nicer look that way. So grab that brush and mix up a nice fluid consistency of paint. You're looking for something like heavy cream here. You can use your whole name, your initials. I like to use my last name. So you just want to add that signature. Okay, that was the final detail. So let's step back and admire our work. You guys have created something beautiful and unique that only you could make. You have color blocked, you have refined and added thickened layers, you've added detail, and look what you have made. Something unique and something special. So I hope that you take all of this information and it helps you to move forward in your acrylic painting journey.